They say Rome was the light of the ancient world, marble gleaming like frozen lightning, banners rippling in the warm breath of the Mediterranean, the city humming with the power of 1,000 conquering legions. Yet tonight, none of that glory seems to matter. Tonight, the empire's heart feels like a cavern of shadows, silent but for the crackle of torches and the slow, uneven breathing of terrified men. It happened in one of the deepest rooms of the imperial palace, a chamber meant not for ceremonies or feasts, but for secrets. Secrets so vile they were never spoken of again. And you're there, standing at the far edge of a polished floor that reflects the room like a dark pool of water, unsure whether your own trembling is from the cold or the truth you sense lurking in the atmosphere. You expect to witness another drunken feast, one of those wild imperial nights where laughter, gold, music, and excess spill into one another like wine. Rome has always known decadence. You've seen senators fall asleep in their cups and noblewomen string jewels across their bare shoulders like offerings to a pagan god. But this is different. The air feels thick, suffocating, as if it's waiting for something to go wrong, as if it already has. Then you see him. Caligula stands barefoot, a bizarre contrast to the opulent room around him. He wears no armor, no imperial regalia, only a thin robe clinging to his body, its deep red fabric soaking the lamplight like coagulating blood. Jewels drip from his neck, his wrists, his hair, but they do nothing to make him look royal. Instead, they make him look unearthly, like a child who raided a dead king's tomb and decided to adorn himself with the spoils. His pupils are dilated, wild, vacant, and focused at the same time, the unmistakable stare of a man who believes himself more than mortal. And then, beside him, the trembling figure is dragged forward. A noblewoman, one of the most respected in Rome. You don't know whether the streaks on her cheeks are tears or sweat, but her knees buckle as she's forced into the center of the room, directly in front of the emperor. Her thin white garment clings to her body, soaked with fear. The guards holding her refuse to meet her eyes, their shame so heavy it hangs in the air like smoke. They have seen many horrors, but not this. Not a punishment carried out through intimacy rather than blade. Caligula steps closer, slowly, almost softly, as though savoring each inch he claims over her fear. His voice, when it comes, is gentle, far too gentle for what is about to unfold. He whispers something into her ear, and whatever it is, her face collapses. Her breath catches. You can almost hear her soul recoil. Then everything changes, because the act that follows is not lust. It is not cruelty alone. It is a ritual, a performance of domination so personal and so grotesque it makes even the torchlight flicker, as if the flames themselves are recoiling. And in that moment, right there, between the emperor's smile and the noblewoman's silent horror, you understand. This moment is not madness. It's a message, one he intends for all of Rome. They say every story has two layers: the spectacle you witness and the truth buried beneath it. What you saw in that chamber, the trembling noblewoman, the torchlight shaking against polished marble, the emperor savoring his dominance as though it were divine nectar, was not the full story. It was only the surface, a mask stretched across something darker, older, and more deliberate. Because beneath Caligula's theatrics, beneath the grotesque rituals he performed and the terror he cultivated, there was a deeper truth waiting to be revealed. And it is this: the truth about Caligula is far worse than the myths. People like to shrug off his cruelty as madness, as if labeling him insane absolves Rome of responsibility. As if one broken emperor could single-handedly tear apart the moral fabric of an empire. But the reality is far more uncomfortable. Caligula's acts were not random. They were not the impulses of an unhinged man drowning in excess and delusion. They were strategy. Twisted, brutal, intimate strategy designed not just to humiliate individuals but to reshape the hierarchy of power itself. You begin to understand this as you watch him circle the noblewoman like a predator circling prey, not lustful but calculating. There's a rhythm to him. His slow steps, his measured breaths, the way his gaze flickers between the woman and the silent men around him. He isn't performing for himself. He's performing for them, for the senators who pretend not to hear her stifled sobs, for the guards who grit their teeth, trapped between loyalty and revulsion, for the unseen Rome that will hear whispers of this night and either tremble or bow. This wasn't madness, the historians whisper centuries later. It was a message. Because what Caligula understood better than any emperor before him was that power isn't maintained through laws or legions. Power thrives through fear, fear that invades the body, fear that seeps into the mind, fear that strips away dignity until all that remains is obedience. And what strips a person of dignity more completely, more intimately, than using the most personal acts as tools of punishment? You feel that truth sink into your bones as Caligula lifts the woman's face, forcing her to look at him. Not a glance, not a plea for mercy, but a command. He wants her to witness him witnessing her pain. Every tremor in her body, every fragment of her brokenness, is feeding something behind his eyes. Something cold, something aware, something shaped, not born. And that is when the second truth reveals itself. Caligula's horror did not emerge from nowhere. His cruelty was not spontaneous. It was cultivated, watered by betrayal, fertilized by fear, sharpened by Rome itself. The empire built him, molded him, and then pretended it was horrified by the result, as though the monster standing before you had not been carved from its own brutality. This wasn't madness, you hear echoed again. The truth is worse than the myth, because the story you're about to follow won't merely unveil Caligula's darkest acts. It will reveal how Rome created the very monster it would later try to destroy. They say monsters are born in darkness, but Caligula's darkness began long before he ever tasted power. It began in the long corridors of the imperial camps, where the scent of iron and sweat clung to everything, and where a little boy wandered between tents like a ghost dressed in miniature armor. They nicknamed him Little Boot, Caligula, because he wore a child's version of the soldier's uniform. The legions adored him, but adoration in Rome was a dangerous thing, because nothing beloved stays untouched for long, especially not in an empire built on blood. You imagine him there, just a child, clutching his father Germanicus' hand as soldiers roared his name. Germanicus, the golden son of Rome, the general who conquered with honor and was loved by his men as fiercely as he loved them back. He was everything Rome celebrated, everything Rome envied, everything Rome feared. And when Rome fears, Rome kills. Caligula was still young when whispers began weaving themselves through the camps. Whispers that his father's food tasted strange, that the glow in his cheeks seemed to dim by the hour, that his strength drained in ways even battle wounds could not explain. You see the boy watching the cup lifted to his father's lips. You see his eyes following the trembling hands of the physician. You see the exact moment Germanicus collapses, his face turning ashen while the room erupts in chaos. A child witnesses death differently. Adults see tragedy. A child sees a lesson. And the lesson Caligula learned that day was carved into him with a precision no blade could hope to match. Rome kills its best to clear the path for the worst. The grief that followed was not gentle. His family was hunted, systematically, politically, quietly. Relatives imprisoned, others executed. His mother, Agrippina, once fierce and proud, starved herself rather than bow to an emperor who feared her lineage. Caligula watched as the people he loved were erased one by one, not by war, but by the cold logic of survival. Rome's survival. The empire injected him with poison long before he became emperor. Poison made of paranoia, betrayal, and the cruel understanding that affection was a liability. Every night, the boy lay awake, listening to the whispers behind locked doors. Plans, threats, strategies disguised as lullabies. Every morning, he woke up a little quieter, a little sharper, a little more aware that love was a battlefield more lethal than any campaign his father had ever led. By the time he reached adolescence, Caligula had witnessed more suicides, executions, and political disappearances than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. He learned to smile without warmth, to speak without feeling, to trust no one. Rome had taken his parents, his innocence, his safety, and in place of those things, it planted something else, something growing, something waiting. They say the first signs of obsession show not in madness, but in silence. And Caligula's silence became a weapon long before he claimed the throne. He watched everyone. He remembered everything. And the empire, unknowingly, was shaping its own executioner. Because when a child is raised on fear, he does not fear power. He consumes it. They say every human being has a breaking point, an invisible line buried deep within the soul where pain turns into something else, something colder, sharper, irrevocable. Caligula's breaking point did not arrive with a scream or a sword or even a death. It arrived quietly, like a shadow slipping beneath a locked door, a moment so subtle and yet so devastating that afterward, nothing in him would ever be human again. You see him now, older but not yet emperor, his face carved with the stillness of someone who has learned to survive by erasing himself. He lives under the rule of Tiberius, a man whose cruelty makes the marble of the palace itself seem to shiver. Tiberius, his adoptive grandfather, had retreated to the island of Capri, a paradise rotting from the inside, and he summoned Caligula there not out of love, but out of fear. The boy was too popular with the legions, too connected by blood to the glory of Germanicus, too dangerous to let out of sight. Capri was no sanctuary. It was a stage for horrors carefully hidden behind silk curtains and warm coastal winds. The island's cliffs hid secrets that Rome refused to speak of. And Caligula, already haunted by the ghosts of his murdered family, was forced to witness everything. Executions disguised as accidents, servants thrown from cliffs for amusement, rituals in dim chambers where suffering became entertainment for an emperor whose soul had long since rotted away. At first, Caligula stayed silent because silence was survival. But silence is not numbness. Silence is pressure, building, tightening, coiling like a serpent around the heart. And one night, in the dim glow of torches, the coil snapped. It happened when Tiberius summoned him to dine. The emperor was old now, his skin sagging like melted wax, his eyes sharp but clouded with paranoia. He studied Caligula the way a butcher studies a calf, calculating the most efficient way to carve. To Tiberius, every guest was a potential enemy, every smile a potential blade. And then, without warning, the emperor made a comment. A soft, almost playful comment about Caligula's mother, about her rebellious nature, about how her final starving days must have been clarifying. The table chuckled. Senators, commanders, sycophants whose laughter was a shield against suspicion. But Caligula did not laugh. The room felt suddenly colder. The sound around him slowed as if slipping underwater. His breath tightened. Something inside him, something he had kept locked away through years of fear, fractured. He looked at the man who had destroyed his family, the man who had turned Capri into a theater of damnation. the man who believed himself immortal simply because he wielded death so casually. And in that instant, Caligula understood something Tiberius never saw coming. He wasn't afraid anymore. That was the breaking point. Not a scream, not a rebellion, but the quiet extinction of fear. A shift so absolute it rewired him. From that night on, Caligula no longer saw cruelty as something inflicted upon him. He saw it as inheritance, a crown passed down not through love, but through blood and terror. And when a man loses fear, he becomes someone Rome can no longer control. He becomes someone Rome should dread. Caligula's rise to power was not sudden, nor was it accidental. It was a careful orchestration, a symphony of cruelty, charm, and calculation, each note designed to cement his authority and bend Rome to his will. You watch him now, freshly crowned, stepping into the purple robe of the emperor, the weight of centuries of expectation pressing down on his shoulders. Yet he wears it lightly, almost as if mocking the mantle that has consumed so many before him. The moment he assumes the throne, Rome does not realize that the boy who once trembled beneath the shadows of Capri has become something far more dangerous. A man who understands that fear is currency, and he has already begun minting it. The first act of his calculated cruelty is subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. He recalls those senators who had whispered against him, who had laughed at the absurdities of his childhood nickname, who had doubted his legitimacy. They are invited to the palace for a ceremonial audience, a performance of loyalty and respect. Some arrive expecting honor, others expect indulgence. But Caligula's gaze is like a scalpel. One wrong expression, one stifled sigh, one glance away, and they are removed quietly, without explanation. Their fates whispered about in corridors long after they have vanished. He is not capricious, he is deliberate. Every removal, every execution, every subtle humiliation is a message. Rome belongs to him, body and soul. Next comes his public persona, which he cultivates with an almost obsessive precision. He appears generous, magnanimous, and even eccentric, throwing games for the people, hosting lavish festivals, and distributing gifts. He smiles in public, embracing the adoration of the masses, while behind the velvet curtains, he consolidates control. The army, loyal to the memory of Germanicus, is flattered with gold and titles, their devotion purchased with the dual currency of fear and fascination. Each gesture, each spectacle is carefully measured. Rome sees an emperor of charm and extravagance, but beneath it all, Caligula is building a machine of psychological dominance. The elimination of his first true rival is a lesson in precision. It is not a display of impulsive rage, but a demonstration of strategy. The rival is accused of treason, but the charge is crafted with such finesse that no one can challenge it. Allies are bribed, witnesses coerced, and before the city knows it, the threat is gone. The populace, unaware of the hidden mechanisms, only sees the emperor's victory. And with each victory, Caligula grows bolder. The empire begins to bend beneath him, not through the weight of armies, but through the quiet, almost invisible threads of control that he weaves around every mind, every conscience, every will. It is in this step-by-step accumulation of power that Caligula becomes terrifying. He is not merely a tyrant. He is an architect of domination, reshaping Rome with every calculated act of cruelty and spectacle. His victories are psychological as much as political. His first public message is a declaration not of laws, but of identity. He will govern not by mercy, not by reason, but by the intimate knowledge of fear. Every senator, every soldier, every citizen is aware, Rome is no longer their own. It is his theater, his stage, and every soul is an instrument for his performance. And in this careful orchestration, the terror begins to rise. Not as rumor, not as whispers in the streets, but as a palpable weight, pressing down on the empire, warning all who dwell within it. Caligula is here, and nothing will ever be the same again. Caligula's true weapon was not the legions he commanded, nor the laws he bent to his will, nor even the vast treasury of Rome at his disposal. His signature method was far more intimate, far more terrifying. The deliberate transformation of vulnerability into a weapon, the conversion of human dignity into spectacle. He discovered that the most potent form of power was not wielded over armies or provinces, but over the very souls of those who believed themselves untouchable. And he wielded it with surgical precision. You see him in the dimly lit chambers of the Palatine, surrounded by nobles and senators whose hearts beat with a mixture of awe and fear. At first, the acts seem almost trivial, mere indulgences of a capricious mind. He summons wives and daughters of Rome's most powerful men, not with violence, but with the authority of someone who has learned that the promise of compliance can be more terrifying than the threat of death. The victims are coerced, humiliated, and made complicit in their own degradation. Not physically in every instance, but psychologically, socially, and morally. He manipulates not only their bodies, but the invisible threads of shame, pride, and fear that bind a person's will. Technically, his method is precise. The acts are performed with a calculated sequence designed to maximize control and minimize outright rebellion. The chamber, the guards, the lighting, even the placement of observers, all are part of an orchestrated theater. A noblewoman kneels not merely for him, but for the senators who watch silently, for the guards who dare not intervene, for the whispers that will echo through marble corridors long after she has been dismissed. Every gesture, every whispered command, is meticulously crafted to assert dominance without leaving room for outright revolt. Symbolically, each act is a declaration of ownership over Rome's elite. By violating what was considered untouchable, Caligula demonstrates that no one, no lineage, no rank is beyond his reach. The intimacy of the acts transforms into a public lesson. Obedience is not enough. Pride, morality, and reputation must all be surrendered at his command. The emperor becomes not merely a ruler, but a living embodiment of fear, a deity of degradation whose gaze alone is enough to unmake a man. Psychologically, the effects are catastrophic. Senators and commanders who once believed themselves secure find their wills eroded. Fathers, husbands, and even the most steadfast warriors learn to question their own judgment, their own courage, their own control. The uncertainty, the terror, and the knowledge that anyone could be made vulnerable at any moment becomes the invisible scaffolding of Caligula's power. Rome is paralyzed not by open warfare, but by the slow, suffocating anxiety of intimacy weaponized against them. And yet, there is an artistry to it, a deliberate cruelty that is almost poetic in its execution. Every act, every humiliation, every whispered boast is not a lapse in morality. It is a performance, a calculated construction of dominance that transforms Caligula's personality into a living instrument of terror. To those who witness, it is horror. To him, it is strategy. And in this weaponization of intimacy, he becomes immortal, not in the sense of reverence, but in the sense of fear. A man whose methods will echo through history, whose cruelty will be remembered not just for what it did, but for the subtle, exquisite way it did it. Even the most absolute power has its boundaries, yet Caligula, intoxicated by control, refuses to recognize them. You feel it in the streets of Rome, where whispers crawl through the marble corridors of the Senate and over the tiled roofs of the Forum. The empire, vast and powerful, should be untouchable. But suddenly, it feels fragile, like a thin pane of glass quivering under a cruel hand. And that is the brilliance of the rising conflict. Caligula does not fight Rome with armies alone. He fights Rome itself. The institutions, the traditions, the invisible laws of honor and pride that have kept emperors alive for generations. He makes enemies out of the very people who should be loyal, turning allies into observers, observers into conspirators, and conspirators into prey. You see it first in the Senate, the heart of Rome's power. Senators once secure in their status now glance over their shoulders, their speeches faltering, their eyes darting for signs of approval or scorn from the emperor. Every law passed, every decree issued, is a double-edged sword. It appears generous or lawful on the surface, but beneath it lurks the subtle poison of obedience enforced through terror. And it is not just political opponents who feel the weight. Even the most devoted soldiers begin to sense the shifting winds, the tension between their loyalty and the unspoken fear that Caligula may one day turn his methods upon them. Armies stationed across the provinces grow restless, their devotion to Rome complicated by the personal charisma and the unpredictable cruelty of their emperor. Governors and commanders, who once thought themselves untouchable in distant provinces, suddenly find themselves summoned to Rome, their reputations at stake, their careers, and sometimes lives, hanging on the delicate threads of Caligula's whims. Even the most disciplined legions, trained to withstand famine, plague, and the chaos of battle, tremble before the invisible army of psychological terror he commands. And yet, the rising enemy is not just external. It grows from within. Conspiracies take root, whispers proliferate, and subtle rivalries intensify. Friends become spies, family becomes suspect, and even the servants who feed and guard him carry the weight of uncertainty. Rome has underestimated him for decades, believing that madness is weakness, believing that unpredictability is incompetence. But every act, every display of cruelty, every intimate domination is meticulously designed to crush these assumptions, to prove that Caligula's unpredictability is not chaos, it is mastery. And mastery breeds dread. You can almost feel the tension coiling in the air as the stakes grow higher. Each day is a gamble. One wrong look, one whispered word, and a loyal ally could become the next victim of the emperor's intricate, terrifying calculus. The odds appear insurmountable. No emperor before him has attempted such a delicate balance between fear and spectacle, and yet Caligula navigates it with the patience of a predator. Rome, the eternal empire, feels small, vulnerable, and exposed, as though it is teetering on the edge of a blade poised between survival and collapse. And as the shadows of the palace lengthen and the people of Rome whisper in corridors and taverns alike, you sense that the climax is inevitable. The city teeters on the brink, poised to witness the consequences of a ruler whose understanding of terror surpasses the conventions of law, morality, and even human decency. Nothing can stop what is coming. Nothing can prepare Rome for the spectacle that awaits. The torches flicker again in the imperial chamber, their light dancing across marble floors slick with shadow. The air is thick, almost suffocating, heavy with the scent of incense, sweat, and fear. You are back where the story began, and yet now, every detail you witness carries the weight of what came before. The childhood trauma, the breaking point, the meticulous rise to power, the subtle but devastating weaponization of intimacy. The room is no longer simply a space. It is a theater, a crucible, a mirror reflecting the deepest, darkest architecture of human domination. Caligula stands at the center, the thin crimson robe clinging to him, the jewelry catching the torchlight like fractured stars. He moves with a predator's precision, his eyes scanning the chamber, calculating. You can see in every twitch of his fingers, every measured step, that he is both performer and director. He has orchestrated this moment with all the patience, cruelty, and intelligence that Rome failed to recognize in him. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is impulsive. And now, every act he performs is the culmination of a life honed in darkness. The The noblewoman kneels before him again, trembling, her body a vessel of terror and shame. But now you understand what is happening. She is not just a victim. She is a symbol, the final note in a symphony of psychological conquest. This is the moment that Rome's elite have dreaded for years, though they have never put it into words. The intimate humiliation, the subtle degradation, the whispered commands, they are all meticulously designed to demonstrate Caligula's dominion over the hearts and minds of those who once thought themselves untouchable. And the effect is immediate. Senators stiffen, guards avert their eyes, and the chamber itself seems to shrink under the weight of what is unfolding. And then you see it. The look in Caligula's eyes, the imperceptible shift of a smile curling across his lips. This is not pleasure, not indulgence. It is triumph. It is absolute control distilled into its most intimate, terrifying form. Every whisper, every glance, every forced gesture is a demonstration of his mastery over fear, over vulnerability, over human dignity itself. The audience is complicit in their own helplessness. Even as they witness horror, they cannot intervene. They can only watch, breathe shallowly, and recognize the impossible genius and horror of the man before them. The moment stretches, suspended in time, until it is almost unbearable. And then, as quickly as it began, it ends. The noblewoman is dismissed, trembling and broken, and the chamber exhales as if releasing a collective breath held for centuries. You realize, finally, that this is the culmination of everything you have seen. A life shaped by betrayal, cruelty, and fear, brought to a single horrifying point of perfection. This is the apex of Caligula's reign, the ultimate proof that power can be seized not only through force or law but through intimate, personal terror, an art form that few dare to understand and fewer still survive. And as you step back from the scene, the shadows seem to cling to you, whispering the same truth you have been following all along. This was never madness. This was method. This was strategy. And in that realization, you finally understand why Rome and the world could not forget him. It starts softly, almost imperceptibly, like the faint tremor of an earthquake beneath marble floors. At first, you think it is merely another shift in the palace's ever-changing atmosphere. A tense whisper here, a nervous glance there. But then you notice something different in Caligula himself. The confidence that once carried him with predatory grace is still there, but now it twitches at the edges, warped by something new, something corrosive. His eyes dart more quickly. His commands come sharper, colder. The torchlight reflects not only cruelty, but fear. You sense it the way an animal senses a storm approaching. Caligula is beginning to break. The terror he once directed outward now starts to curl back toward him, looping like a serpent devouring its own tail. He sees betrayal everywhere, in the way a servant hesitates before answering, in the silence of a senator, in the unremarkable shuffle of a guard's footsteps. Even the marble statues seem to watch him with judgmental stillness, their unblinking eyes igniting his paranoia. Every shadow becomes a plot. Every whisper becomes a conspiracy. Rome feels it too. The city trembles under the weight of his paranoia. His decrees grow stranger, harsher, unhinged. One day he showers the people with extravagant feasts and games. The next he orders executions for imagined slights. You watch him pace through the palace like a caged lion, his mind unraveling thread by thread, eroded by the very weapon he perfected, fear. He has inhaled too much of his own poison. His allies, once loyal in ambition, begin to withdraw. Distances grow in conversations. Smiles become masks. Greetings become formalities. Men who once knelt willingly now kneel out of necessity, calculating the moment they will rise again with a dagger instead of a bowed head. Even his beloved soldiers, those who swore to protect him, whisper in hidden corners, weighing the burden of loyalty against the instinct of survival. But Caligula cannot see the cracks widening around him. He is too consumed by visions of threats that do not exist, phantoms conjured in the loneliness of his own power. He isolates himself, surrounding his chambers with guards he trusts less every day. He questions everyone except his paranoia, which grows louder, heavier, more absolute. And then comes the fatal mistake. The moment every tyrant fears and every conspirator awaits. In a frenzy of suspicion, he lashes out at the very men who once protected him, accusing them of treason, undermining their honor, humiliating their loyalty. The line between servant and enemy, soldier and assassin, collapses. Those who once feared him now recognize something profound. Caligula is no longer dangerous because he is powerful. He is dangerous because he is weak. You feel it like a shift in the wind. The palace no longer belongs to him. Rome no longer trembles for him, but because of him. His terror has overreached, metastasized, and finally turned inward, hollowing out the man who once commanded the world with a whisper. And somewhere, in the cold heart of the palace, within the echoing corridors where plots have brewed for months, fate sharpens its blade. Caligula cannot see it, but you can. The fall has already begun.